Chapter 1, Julian Hawthorne, heir to a corporate empire, had always been the very definition of cold and ascetic. Yet, the first time he ever lost control was when his adopted sister confessed her love for him. To crush her hopes, he brought another woman home, knowing full well it would shatter Eleonora. Finally, Eleonora gave up, but that was when his own agony truly began. When she finally let go of the secret love that had defined half her life, treating him as nothing more than a brother, never again crossing that line, it was Julian who went mad, begging her to come back. Attention passengers, flight CA933 from Paris has now arrived. As the announcement echoed through the arrivals hall, Eleonora, Nora, Redwood felt no fatigue, despite having waited for 4 hours. She gazed at the gate with eager anticipation. Company affairs had been demanding lately, forcing Julian on frequent business trips. Nora hadn't seen him in nearly a month. She stood on her toes, her eyes fixed on the large electronic screen above. Her long dormant heart fluttered in time with the scrolling text. Before long, a familiar figure appeared in her line of sight. Unable to contain her joy, she broke into a small run to greet him. But Nora's steps came to an abrupt halt when she saw the person by his side. A woman in a red slip dress, her makeup exquisite, was leaning against Julian's chest. They were pressed close together, whispering intimately, and a soft, gentle smile played on Julian's lips. Nora froze, watching their closeness. It was as if a bucket of ice water had been poured over her head, leaving her cold to the bone. Only when the couple had slowly walked through the gate did Julian finally notice her. The smile in his eyes vanished instantly, replaced by a sheet of frost. The shift in his expression did not escape Nora's notice, and a sharp pain lanced through her heart. Seeing Nora, the woman nestled in his arms stepped forward and extended a friendly hand. "You must be Nora. Hello, I'm Clarissa Vance. I'm your brother's girlfriend." The word girlfriend struck Nora with the force of a physical blow, and the color drained from her face. Julian had been single for years, a man immune to feminine charms, devoted only to his work. How could a girlfriend suddenly materialize out of nowhere? She ignored the outstretched hand, her gaze fixed on Julian, her eyes turning red. Her voice trembled. "You have a girlfriend?" Julian glanced at Nora, his tone utterly calm. "Yes." Nora's face went deathly white. Before she could say another word, Julian turned his attention away from her, wrapped his arm around Clarissa, and walked on. On the drive back, Clarissa sat in the passenger seat, initiating conversation with Nora in the back. Nora stared out the window with empty eyes, offering only the occasional, non-committal hum. Undeterred by the cold response, Clarissa enthusiastically shared the details of her romance with Julian. "It was raining every day in Paris recently. I couldn't get my new shoes wet, so Julian carried me back to the hotel. And that one time in London, we came across a field of lavender. Julian saw how much I loved it, so he bought the entire estate for me." Clarissa grew more animated as she spoke, her eyes shining with adoration for Julian. Nora lowered her head in silence, her heart feeling as though it were being pierced by a blade, bleeding profusely. Noticing Nora's somber mood, Clarissa skillfully changed the subject. "I've been talking so much about your brother and me, you must be tired of hearing it, little sister. Why don't we talk about something else? You're starting your senior year of college, right? Are you seeing anyone? I have a cousin who goes to your school. Should I introduce you to?" "No, thank you." Nora's refusal was curt, but Clarissa didn't give up. She turned to Julian. "My cousin is about the same age as Nora, and he's tall and handsome. Julian, what do you think?" Julian was silent for a moment, then nodded. That could work. Those 4 words were a bombshell dropped into the turbulent sea of Nora's heart. She could no longer suppress her emotions. Her eyes red, she stared at the man in the driver's seat. "Julian, I don't want a boyfriend, you know perfectly well who I like is." Her words were cut short by a furious shout from Julian. He slammed on the brakes, screeching the car to a halt on the side of the road, and threw open the rear door. "Eleonora, if you're going to spout nonsense and refuse to learn your lesson, then get the hell out and let the cold air clear your head." Nora knew Julian was furious. She didn't dare defy him, terrified of what other forbidden words might spill from her lips. Biting her lip, she bowed her head and got out of the car. As the door slammed shut, she could faintly hear Clarissa's voice, attempting to smooth things over. "Julian, don't be so harsh with the girl. She's your sister after all. But why does she always call you by your first name, instead of brother? Nora tensed, her fingers unconsciously curling into fists, but Julian's answer sent her heart plummeting into an abyss. She was spoiled rotten. She's always been unruly. With that, the door closed, and Julian sped away, kicking up a cloud of dust. The tears Nora had held back for so long finally streamed down her face. The roadside was desolate. She began the long walk home, one slow step at a time, 1,000 thoughts swirling in her mind. Why didn't she call him brother? Because in her heart, he had never been her brother. Chapter 2, the truth was, her name wasn't Eleonora Hawthorne. She was born Eleonora Redwood. Her parents had been part of the city's elite, close friends of the Hawthorne family for generations. But when she was 7, the two families had gone on an outing together. Eleonora had begged to ride in the Hawthornes' new sports car, so Julian had switched places with her, getting into the Redwoods' car instead. On the way, there was a horrific accident. Eleonora's mother and the driver died instantly. The Redwood car burst into flames. Her father, in his last moments, shoved Julian out of the car, saving his life. Overnight, Eleonora became an orphan. Her relatives, busy carving up the family fortune, sent her to an orphanage. She spent 3 days there before Julian, like a god descending from the heavens, came for her. He had crouched down in front of her, gathering her small, trembling form into a gentle, heartbreaking embrace. "Nora," he had whispered, "from now on, I'm your brother." And so, Eleonora Redwood became Eleonora Hawthorne. Without question, Julian had been exceptionally good to her over the years. Everyone in their circle teased him for how he doted on his sister. In his school days, he'd rush home to be with her. After taking over the family business, he would work late into the night, just to make sure he was home on time to be with her. Julian Hawthorne, the golden boy of their generation, had only ever surrendered to 3 things: Eleonora's tears, Eleonora's pleas, and Eleonora herself. If she would just call him brother, he would have given her his life. But in all those years, she never once called him that. At first, he thought she was just having trouble adjusting. It wasn't until much later that he learned the real reason, and from that day on, he withdrew all his affection. Nora didn't get home until after dark. As she stepped through the door, she saw the 3 Hawthornes and Clarissa seated at the dining table, chatting warmly. No one noticed her standing at the entrance. She stood in the shadows, watching the happy scene, a bitter taste filling her mouth. It was Martha, the housekeeper, who finally saw her and called her over to wash up for dinner. A large pile of shrimp shells sat in front of Julian's plate. He was bent over, meticulously picking the bones from a piece of fish. Nora looked at the table laden with seafood but didn't pick up her chopsticks. The tender, white fish was placed in Clarissa's bowl. Clarissa, in turn, picked up a piece of shrimp and fed it to Julian. Nora watched as Clarissa smiled shyly, then took a napkin to delicately wipe Julian's hands. The two of them were lost in their own world, whispering intimately. A benevolent smile graced Mrs. Hawthorne's face. She remarked that Julian loved shrimp and praised Clarissa for being so thoughtful. Hearing this, a dull ache throbbed in Nora's chest. Because of her severe seafood allergy, the family hadn't served it in years. By the time dinner was ending, Nora hadn't eaten a single bite. Julian's attention had been entirely on Clarissa. He hadn't noticed a thing. It was Clarissa who saw Nora's empty bowl. She picked up a piece of cold fish, placed it in Nora's bowl, and said with a tone full of concern, "It's all my fault for talking so much. You've hardly eaten a thing. Here, try this fish, it's delicious." Nora made no move to eat. She lowered her head, trying to hide the dimness in her eyes. The atmosphere at the table instantly chilled. Clarissa looked aggrieved. "Julian, does your sister dislike me?" Julian's face darkened. "Eat it." Nora choked back a sob, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't, I'm allergic." Julian's tone was non-negotiable. "An allergy is just a few red spots. The fish is a kind gesture from your sister-in-law. Eat it." Nora looked up, meeting his displeased gaze with shock. She had once accidentally eaten seafood and broken out in hives all over her body. Julian had been frantic, calling in every dermatologist in the city in the middle of the night and staying by her side, not sleeping a wink. But now, just to please Clarissa, he was forcing her to eat fish. The contrast between then and now flooded Nora's mind, and an unbearable sourness filled her heart. She picked up her chopsticks, put the fish in her mouth, then silently stood up and went to her room. In the middle of the night, Nora's allergy triggered a high fever. Lying delirious in bed, she buried herself under the covers and unconsciously uttered the secret she had hidden for so long. "Julian, you knew how I felt about you. Why would you do this to me? Why bring home a girlfriend just to push me away?" Standing by her bed, Arthur and Alina Hawthorne's faces changed instantly when they heard her feverish words. They had never imagined Nora harbored such feelings. If word of this got out, the Hawthorne family's reputation would be ruined. The lights in the Hawthorne mansion stayed on all night. Nora's body didn't begin to recover until the following afternoon. She opened her eyes to see several maids packing up her belongings. "Mrs. Channing, why are you touching my things?" Mr. and Mrs. Hawthorne said that you are to move out as soon as you wake up. They asked us to pack everything for you, Mrs. Channing's words struck Nora like a bolt from the blue. She froze. Her mind went blank, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. Barefoot, she ran downstairs. Julian was sitting alone in the grand hall, as if he had been waiting for her. Seeing him was like seeing a savior. Her voice was filled with panic. "Why are Dad and Mom kicking me out? What did I do wrong?" Julian's voice was weary and cold. "They heard you, Eleonora." Those 4 simple words exploded over her head like a clap of thunder. She had been completely delirious with fever. What Mr. and Mrs. Hawthorne had heard was self-evident. She broke down completely, tears streaming from her eyes. "So, they can't accept it either, can they?" At her words, Julian's expression shifted, and he coldly brushed her hand away. "No one can accept it. Eleonora, we are brother and sister." Chapter 3, once Arthur and Alina Hawthorne made a decision, no one could change it. Nora wasn't even allowed to see them. She was quickly sent away from the Hawthorne estate and settled in an apartment complex in a distant suburb. It was a remote, sparsely populated area, far from the Hawthorne home, making it nearly impossible for her to see Julian. With the summer holidays upon her, Nora found a part-time job at a coffee shop located right below the Hawthorne Group's headquarters. The shop was just at the corner of the main entrance, and most of its customers were Hawthorne Group employees. It didn't take long for Julian to notice Nora working there. More than half a month had passed since she'd been sent away, and his anger had slowly subsided. He sent his assistant to find her and hand her a black credit card. The implication was clear. Even though she had been sent away, she didn't need to work so hard. The Hawthornes could still support her. But Nora just shook her head, her eyes red, and handed the card back. She was about to graduate. She couldn't take their money anymore. After failing to persuade her, the assistant had no choice but to return with the card. Nora watched his back until he disappeared completely before lowering her gaze. Besides earning a living, she had another reason for working here. Here, she could see Julian every day. For her, that was enough. Summer afternoons always made people drowsy. The director of the planning department treated his team, ordering a large box of coffees. After checking the order, Nora delivered it upstairs. The office staff were gathered together, chatting idly. Holding the large box, Nora found it difficult to push the door open, so she knocked twice. The person who opened the door made her freeze. Clarissa. Clarissa's expression flickered for a second upon seeing her, but in the next moment, she greeted Nora warmly and beckoned her inside. Nora instinctively took 2 steps forward, only to have her path blocked by Clarissa's suddenly outstretched leg. She stumbled and fell hard. The hot coffee in the box spilled everywhere. 1 or 2 cups splashed onto Clarissa's leg, and she immediately let out a piercing scream. Hearing the commotion, everyone rushed over, including Julian, who had been on his way to see Clarissa. Seeing the coffee staining Clarissa's dress, his face changed abruptly. He took the tissues handed to him by a subordinate and knelt down, frowning as he carefully wiped at the stain, asking her tenderly if it hurt. No one noticed that Nora had fallen headfirst into the pool of coffee, her skin flushed red from the scalding heat. Clarissa had only been splashed a little. The rest of the scalding coffee had drenched Nora. A burning pain shot through her limbs, making her feel as if she were trapped in a steamer. Coffee dripped from her hair, blurring her vision. No one came to help her up. Everyone was fussing over Clarissa. She could only grit her teeth against the pain, struggle to her feet, and turn to leave. Watching Nora try to walk away without a word, the anger smoldering inside Julian erupted into flames. "Eleonora, did you spill that coffee on Clarissa on purpose? You're not even going to apologize before you leave?" His words made Nora tremble. The pent-up feeling of injustice burst forth. "It wasn't me, she tripped me." Her explanation was cut short by Clarissa. "It was my fault for getting in your way, Nora. You must have been in a hurry and lost your grip on the coffee. Julian, if you're going to blame anyone, blame me." Seeing Nora's stubborn refusal to apologize, Julian's rage intensified. "Since you refuse to apologize, you can kneel on the ground and wipe up every last drop of that coffee." After saying this, Julian scooped up Clarissa, whose calf was now a patch of red, and headed for the hospital without giving Nora a second glance. Watching his resolute departure, Nora's heart ached with unbearable pain. The people around her urged her to clean up the mess. She could only take the cloth from the cleaning lady and silently kneel on the floor. Tears fell, drop by drop, onto the ground, quickly mingling with the dark coffee stains. Nora had fallen hard, and the coffee had splattered everywhere. She numbly wiped at the floor, unresponsive to the world around her. By the time she had cleaned the last tile, she looked up to find that everyone had gone home. The room was empty, and the sky outside was dark. Her scalded knees were scraped raw by the tiles. Fresh blood trickled down her leg, mixing with the dried coffee, and dripped into her shoes, sticky and cold. The elevators were shut down, so she had to take the stairs. Nora clung to the handrail, dragging herself down step by painful step. She had only descended a third of the 30 floors when an excruciating pain shot through her leg. Each step was like dancing on the edge of a knife, and her entire body was drenched in sweat. The stairwell was pitch black and eerily silent when her phone suddenly rang. It was her manager. He told her not to come to work anymore. She was fired. When Nora asked why, the manager said it was Mr. Hawthorne's orders. Remembering what had happened earlier that day, Nora couldn't stop herself. She had to call Julian and demand an explanation. The voice that came through the phone was ice cold. "Eleonora, you know exactly what kind of thoughts you have about me. Right now, the very sight of you makes me sick. Stay far away from me. I don't want to see you." Every word was like an icicle piercing her body, the pain so intense she could no longer stand. She collapsed in the darkness, clutching the railing, a wretched sob escaping her throat like the cry of a lost bird, alone and directionless. Chapter 4. After leaving the Hawthorne home, Nora had been working part-time jobs continuously. With the new semester approaching, she still hadn't saved enough for tuition. Fortunately, a kind colleague introduced her to a high-paying gig. One hard day's work would cover the difference. On the day of the event, her colleague brought her to the venue. After changing into their uniforms, they began setting up. As evening fell after a long day's work, guests began to arrive in droves, and the main hosts of the party made their entrance. Her colleague excitedly grabbed Nora's arm, telling her to look at the stage. Nora lifted her head and saw them immediately. Julian and Clarissa, bathed in a spotlight, locked in a passionate kiss. The glass in her hand slipped, shattering on the floor with a crash. Fortunately, the crowd was cheering so loudly that no one noticed the small disturbance. Her colleague, however, frowned and chided her for being clumsy. Nora stared ahead, completely lost in a daze. Julian placed a crown on Clarissa's head, and the strains of "Happy Birthday" filled the hall. So, this was the birthday party Julian had thrown for Clarissa. No wonder it was so extravagant. The understanding dawned on Nora, but it brought an unbearable pain to her heart. She dug her nails into her palms, squeezing hard to stifle the cry that threatened to escape. Her head felt heavy, the lights before her turning blindingly bright. Dazed and heartbroken, Nora turned to leave, only to bump into a woman in a white dress. The woman was clearly not one to be trifled with. Though it was only a slight bump, she immediately flew into a rage. "Where did this server come from? Haven't you had any training? How could Mr. Hawthorne's party have such a low-rent server?" As she ranted, she grabbed a glass of red wine from a nearby table and, with a sharp flick of her wrist, splashed it all over Nora's head. The dark red liquid trickled down her pale skin. Her soaked hair stuck to her face, making her look utterly wretched. Nora didn't fight back. She wiped her face, mumbled an apology, and tried to turn away. But suddenly, a hand grabbed her wrist. Nora went rigid, a flicker of hope rising in her heart. She remembered a time long ago, after her parents had died. She was an orphan, attending a party alone, and had gotten into an argument with someone. The person had humiliated her, calling her an orphan outcast. She had been on the verge of tears, unable to say a word in her own defense. Then, suddenly, someone had grabbed her hand. She had turned to see Julian, who had appeared out of nowhere. He had held her hand tightly, and in front of everyone declared that from that day forward, she was a Hawthorne, his sister. If anyone dared to touch a hair on her head, they would be making an enemy of him and of the entire Hawthorne family. The troublemaker had immediately backed down and apologized. She, however, had burst into tears. The man who had been so stern just a moment before was suddenly flustered, clumsily wiping her tears away, coaxing her to call him brother. But she had stubbornly refused. He had just chuckled and pulled her into his embrace. "Fine, don't call me that. Just know this, Nora, brother will always protect you." And for years, he had done just that, never letting her suffer the slightest injustice. The memory stirred her emotions. Nora turned her head, her face filled with anticipation. The smile froze on her lips. It was Clarissa. "Nora, what are you doing here? What a coincidence." "Perfect timing. I was just saying I wanted to introduce you to my cousin. He's on his way. Why don't you go wait for him in room 606? The words sent a chill down Nora's spine. She instinctively glanced at Julian, who stood beside Clarissa with his arm around her. But Julian simply looked away, his expression calm and detached, as if he didn't care in the slightest. Didn't care who she met. Didn't care whose girlfriend she might become. Didn't care about her. Nora's racing heart suddenly plummeted, falling into an endless darkness. She snatched the keycard from Clarissa's hand, her voice filled with a desperate resolve. "Fine, I'll go." Chapter 5. Nora waited in the room for a long time. If it hadn't been for Julian's indifferent expression, she never would have been provoked into coming here. The party outside had ended, but Clarissa's cousin still hadn't arrived. Nora was growing impatient. At midnight, she finally heard voices at the door. A leering, pig-faced slob of a man opened the door and walked in. "Miss Redwood, you've been waiting a while, haven't you? Let's not waste any more time. A moment of spring is worth 1,000 gold pieces, as they say." Hearing this, Nora knew something was wrong. She scrambled to her feet and began circling the sofa to keep her distance. A wave of revulsion washed over her, her heart pounding in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. "What are you talking about?" The grotesque man followed her around the sofa, a lewd grin on his face. "What am I talking about? It's so late, and you're still here, Miss Redwood. Doesn't that mean you want to spend the night with me?" Nora's face turned ashen. As she dodged the man, she shakily pulled out her phone and dialed Julian's number. It finally connected, but the voice on the other end was Clarissa's. "Is something wrong? Julian's in the shower." The man heard the voice too. A sickening smile spread across his lips as he lunged forward and grabbed Nora's dress. "My cousin told me everything. Tonight, you're all mine. I can do whatever I want with you." With a ripping sound, her dress tore open. Nora's heart felt like it would burst from her chest. She scrambled for the door, but the door had been locked from the outside. "Help, is anyone there? Help!" Nora beat on the door with all her might, her face a mask of terror. She watched as the large man strode toward her, a triumphant look on his face. With the last ounce of her wits, she sent a text message to Julian. "Help me." The moment she hit send, the man snatched her phone and smashed it against the door. Nora clung to the doorknob, refusing to let go, her palms scraped raw and bloody. The man pried her fingers off the handle, then lifted the terrified, nearly unconscious girl and threw her onto the bed. He pounced, a vicious sneer on his face. The room filled with the sound of tearing fabric and a girl's agonized screams. Large tears mixed with cold sweat fell onto the bed. Nora crossed her arms tightly over her chest, her sharp teeth sinking into the man's shoulder. The man howled in pain. He raised his hand to slap her, but a tremendous crash at the door made him freeze. After seeing the text, Julian had bolted, sprinting for the 6th floor. He heard the sharp screams coming from inside 606, and a wave of panic washed over him. He kicked the door open. The scene inside sent a surge of rage through him. He stormed forward and sent the man, who was still standing stunned by the bed, crashing to the floor with a single punch. Then he stripped off his own jacket, wrapped it around the traumatized Nora, and carried her out. The girl in his arms was trembling uncontrollably, her cold tears soaking his shirt. Julian's face was grim as he placed her in the car seat. He made a call to his assistant, telling him to have a change of clothes sent over and to deal with the man he'd left unconscious in room 606. After the ordeal, Nora was like a startled bird. She clutched the corner of Julian's shirt, refusing to let go, her eyes red and raw. "You do care about me, don't you?" Julian looked at the girl weeping in his arms, his pupils constricting slightly. But his voice was cold. "An incident this vile, it wouldn't matter who it was, I wouldn't stand by and do nothing." He paused, then added, "Don't blame Clarissa. He's just a distant relative of hers. She had no idea what kind of person he was. I will handle this. When the clothes arrive, change into them. The assistant will take you home." With that, Julian forcefully pulled his shirt from her grasp, shut the car door, and walked away. Nora's hand was empty, but she clenched it tighter, sitting up to look out the window. From beginning to end, Julian never looked back. An intense pain spread from her heart through her entire body, so severe it made her curl into a ball. She huddled in the corner, clutching the jacket he had left her. The faint scent in the car was pleasant, but it wasn't the fragrance she always used. She looked around the familiar, yet strangely alien car. The family photo she had placed on the dashboard had been replaced with a selfie of Clarissa. The colorful decorative knot she had spent hours weaving had been swapped for a string of pearls. The snacks she always kept on the console were gone, their place taken by a pile of makeup. Every trace of Eleonora Redwood had been meticulously erased. Chapter 6. It took Nora a long time to emerge from the shadow of that night. Every night, she had to hug a photo of herself and Julian to fall asleep. Even her dreams were filled with the memories of their 20-plus years together. In her dreams, Julian would hold her hand and take her to the zoo. He would sit with her through the math classes he hated. He would buy her every beautiful dress she liked. He would hold her tight when she woke up from a nightmare, crying hysterically, and promise he would never leave her. His expression was so gentle, his tone so indulgent, as if he were cradling a precious pearl, terrified of dropping or damaging it. Nora drowned herself in these beautiful dreams. Waking up to the present, she felt a profound sense of loss, as if she had lost the entire world. Ever since she had turned 18 and stolen a kiss from a sleeping Julian, only to be caught, he had treated her like a plague, avoiding her at all costs. He was determined to correct her feelings, to make her admit they were brother and sister. But whether she was Eleonora Redwood or Eleonora Hawthorne, she had never once seen Julian as a brother, so she could never bring herself to say the word. August 19th was the anniversary of her parents' death. She finally mustered the courage to leave her apartment. Using the money she had saved over the summer, she bought a large number of offerings and went to the cemetery. The grounds were quiet, with hardly anyone around except for the noisy cicadas. Holding a black umbrella, Nora climbed the steps and walked deeper into the cemetery. When she was about 10 meters from her parents' grave, she faintly heard someone speaking. She instinctively slowed her pace and peered ahead. Dressed in black, Julian stood ramrod straight before her parents' grave, his voice hoarse. "Uncle, Auntie, I've been dreaming a lot about the crash lately. I don't know if it's because you know what's been happening these past few years and can't find peace. I'm sorry. I failed to raise Nora properly. It was my fault. I've failed you, failed to repay the debt of you saving my life." Nora had never realized Julian was still so haunted by the accident. Seeing the pain on his face, her own heart ached in sympathy. She dropped her umbrella and ran forward, throwing her arms around him from behind, her voice filled with heartache. "Mom and Dad's accident was just that, an accident. You can't blame yourself. Please don't torture yourself with guilt." Julian's body went rigid. He coldly removed her hands, then stood up and began arranging the offerings neatly on the grave. After he had finished, he looked at Nora, who stood obediently before him. For once, he didn't greet her with a frosty glare. For a fleeting moment, Nora felt as if they had gone back in time to the days before she turned 18. But Julian's next words were like a bucket of cold water dumped over her heart. "Nora, swear to me. In front of your parents, swear that for the rest of your life, you will only ever see me as your brother." Nora stood frozen for a long moment before his words registered. Her eyes turned red as she stubbornly shook her head. "I can't say that. I can't tell such a lie in front of my mom and dad." Chapter 7. Julian said nothing more. He simply dropped to his knees and began to kowtow before the gravestone, apologizing. "Uncle, Auntie, I'm sorry. It's my failure these past years that has allowed Nora to develop these inappropriate feelings. It is I who have been a poor brother. I have failed your expectations. I have failed to repay the debt of you saving my life." Nora tried to stop him, but she couldn't pull him up no matter how hard she tried. Seeing the blood seeping from Julian's forehead, Nora finally broke down, pouring out the words she had held in her heart. "Julian, I have never thought of you as my brother." Julian finally stopped. He looked up, his face as cold and merciless as a winter frost, terrifying to behold. "Eleonora Redwood, when your father pushed me out of that car, I swore an oath to him. I swore I would treat you as my own sister and take care of you for the rest of my life. If I broke that vow, may I be struck by lightning and left without a burial place. Is that what you want? For me to die a horrible death?" It had been a long time since Nora had heard anyone call her by that name. She couldn't answer his question. She was terrified that the vicious curse might come true. She thought of the past, of the horrific crash, of her parents' charred bodies. Nora could no longer bear the pain in her heart and broke into hysterical sobs. She just loved someone. What had she done wrong? If it was okay for him and Clarissa, why not for him and her? Why was she the one exception? Julian didn't press her further. Amidst her earth-shattering cries, he stood up and walked away in silence. By the time Nora had cried herself out, her body limp and weak, she realized Julian was gone. The sky had darkened, and the cemetery caretaker urged her to leave. Nora didn't pick up the black umbrella. She dragged her numb legs and began the long walk back toward the city. She hailed a cab, then took out her phone and began composing an email. She poured out the feelings of a young girl, spanning more than 20 years. The recipient was Julian Hawthorne. After leaving the cemetery, Julian went straight home. He walked into what had been Nora's room, intending to have the staff throw out everything that remained. As the maids began to clear things out, he leaned against the desk and happened to spot a black notebook tucked away in a crevice, hidden carefully. He pulled it out and opened it. It was Nora's diary. The flyleaf was covered with his name, written over and over. Julian stroked the name she had written with her own hand, his heart trembling slightly, but his hands didn't stop. He flipped through the pages, one by one, until he reached the end. Every page was filled with her hidden love for him. The last entry was dated July 6th, the day he had returned to the country with his girlfriend. For some reason, a strange feeling washed over Julian. He found himself wanting to know what Nora had written about today. The thought had barely formed when he was startled by it. He quickly admonished himself. He had to keep his thoughts in check to stop this line of thinking. Nora could only be his sister. When the maids finished packing, they asked where to put the boxes. Julian hesitated for a moment, then told them to put everything in storage. He was about to go to his own room. But just before leaving, on a strange impulse, he took the diary and slipped it into his pocket. Chapter 8. After tucking the diary inside a large dictionary and placing it on the highest shelf, Julian's heart finally settled. The contents of that notebook were too dangerous. No one else could see it. Just then, Clarissa knocked and entered. Julian quickly lay back on the sofa, pulling out his phone and pretending to deal with work matters. But an email in his inbox caught his eye. He opened it and was immediately confronted by Nora's transgressive words. The anger that had just subsided flared up again. Nora was truly incorrigible. Clarissa noticed Julian's dark expression the moment she walked in. She glanced at the phone in his hand and asked pointedly, "Julian, what's wrong? Did Nora upset you again?" The day Nora moved out had been a huge ordeal, and Clarissa had found out about her feelings, so Julian didn't hide it from her. She never should have entertained such a disgraceful obsession in the first place. All she does is disrupt the peace in this family. Seeing the coldness on his face, an idea sparked in Clarissa's mind. You and Nora aren't related by blood. She's young, it's understandable she'd get stuck in a dead end. If you ask me, there's a simple way to make her give up for good. Just tell her we're getting married, then send her a picture of us in our wedding attire. I guarantee she'll back off. Julian froze for a second, not answering. He thought about it all night. The next morning, he took Clarissa to a bridal shop. After choosing their outfits, Julian pulled Clarissa into his arms and had the photographer record a short video. The next second, he sent the video to Nora. "I'm getting married, Eleonora." When Nora saw the words "getting married" on her phone, she couldn't process it for a long time. Her hand trembling, she tapped on the video. The couple in the center of the screen looked like a match made in heaven, wrapped in each other's arms, their happy faces like a sharp blade stabbing into Nora's heart. An icy chill spread from the wound to every corner of her body, freezing her in place. The video was filled with exclamations of "they're so perfect together." Nora clutched her numb heart, the pain so intense she could hardly breathe. Julian was getting married? He had to be lying to her, right? 1,000 thoughts raced through Nora's mind. A sharp pain suddenly erupted, jolting her from her stupor. She pushed herself up from the table and staggered downstairs. Nora hailed a taxi and went straight to the bridal shop. The shop had been cleared out for a private appointment. Nora immediately spotted Julian sitting on a sofa. Ignoring the staff who tried to stop her, she burst into the studio and threw herself into Julian's arms, her voice trembling. "Julian, if the accident had never happened, if my last name was still Redwood, would we have been together?" Julian was silent for a long time. Seeing the light slowly gathering in Nora's eyes, he couldn't stop himself from putting on that cold, detached mask again. He had the staff pull her away. He stood up, looking down at her, his voice devoid of any emotion. "From the first moment I saw you, I have only ever seen you as my sister. It wouldn't have mattered if you became a Hawthorne or not. It would never have been possible for us." The tears Nora had held back for so long finally streamed down her face. She stood frozen, feeling as if her insides were being ripped apart. But Julian didn't look at her. He turned to Clarissa, who was making her entrance in a magnificent wedding gown, and pulled her into his arms. Tears blurred Nora's vision. She couldn't see their faces clearly. The loving scenes she had imagined countless times in the dead of night were now playing out right in front of her. The groom was Julian, but the bride was not Eleonora Redwood. Julian wrapped his arm around Clarissa's waist and kissed her. The hands that had been held back so firmly by the staff finally lost all their strength and fell limp at her sides. Chapter 9. After leaving the bridal shop, Nora walked around in a daze. She stayed in her room, never setting foot outside. It wasn't until the start of the new semester, when the university organized a volunteer teaching program for senior students in a remote mountain village. The conditions were harsh, and no one had signed up. The program coordinator was becoming desperate. Nora just wanted to leave the city, so she volunteered. A week later, she was sent deep into the Redwood Mountains. Life here was far from the city, simple and austere, with few resources. She taught at the school during the day and lay in her dorm room at night, staring into space. The only other thing she did was look at Clarissa's social media feed. Clarissa posted about her romance almost daily. Nora felt like a thief, peering into someone else's happiness in the dead of night, secretly learning about Julian's life through these photos. A month later, Nora saw Julian and Clarissa's wedding invitation on her feed. That night, she leaned against the cold wall, looking at the photos over and over again. Her aching heart felt as if it had fallen into a void, empty and desolate. When the sun rose, Nora got up, dazed, and picked up her textbooks to go to class. Lightning and thunder cracked across the sky as a torrential downpour began. Nora, who had grown painfully thin, could barely stand steady against the wind and rain. She was soaked to the bone by the time she reached the school. She wrung the water from her clothes and entered the classroom. Just as she wrote the lesson title on the blackboard, she heard frantic screams from outside. "Mudslide, the mudslide is coming, run." Nora looked at the dozens of young children in the room, and her foggy mind suddenly cleared. The rushing floodwaters were already up to her thighs, and the children had no way to escape. Nora told them to stand on their desks, and then, one by one, she carried them on her back to higher ground on a nearby hill. A few villagers who lived nearby rushed to help, and soon all the children were moved to safety. Nora breathed a sigh of relief and began to count them. But no matter how many times she counted, one child was missing. Her heart sank. Teacher Meng, "It's Leo, he didn't make it out." Leo's mother, who was disabled, heard that her son was still in the school and began to cry, trying to jump into the water. Several people had to hold her back. By now, the floodwaters had risen to shoulder height. None of the adults dared to go back down. They listened to the mother's heart-wrenching screams, their faces filled with sorrow. But Nora was in a daze. In the desperate face of Leo's mother, she suddenly saw the face of her own mother. When Mom knew she was going to be separated from me forever, was she in this much pain? Nora didn't know. But without a second thought, she ran down the hill. Ignoring the shouts of the others behind her, she braved the heavy rain and waded through the floodwaters back toward the school. Nora climbed to the second floor and found Leo huddled in a corner of the office, crying in terror. She quickly scooped him up and rushed downstairs. The wooden building groaned under the pressure of the flood. A piece of timber fell from above, striking Nora and knocking her down the stairs. Run, with all her strength, she threw Leo into the water. A few villagers who had followed her caught the child securely. Another plank fell, striking Nora on the head. Her consciousness began to fade. Then a third and a fourth and more, crashing down one after another. "Teacher Meng," she heard the villagers' screams and the heavy thud of falling wood. Thick, sticky blood ran from her forehead into the floodwaters. Nora's vision turned red. It felt as if every bone in her body had been shattered. She thought hazily, today is Julian's wedding day. I haven't even had a chance to wish him well in person. Am I going to die like this? Nora didn't want to, but there was nothing she could do. She forced her eyes open, pulled her phone from her pocket, and with the last of her strength, sent 2 messages to Julian. "Congratulations on your wedding, brother." The signal in the mountains was poor. The small white circle next to the messages spun for a long time. The moment she saw the red exclamation mark appear, the last bit of strength holding her up vanished. "Julian, this is the first time I've ever called you brother. And it will be the last. I'm finally letting you go. So you have to be happy." Large tears streamed from the corners of her eyes. Blood dripped onto the phone, completely covering the small red mark. With a clap of thunder, Eleonora Redwood closed her eyes and was still. Chapter 10, the wedding ceremony was about to begin. Julian bent down to retrieve the rings from a drawer. As he stood up, a sharp, violent pain seized his heart. He clutched his chest and sat on a chair, trying to catch his breath. He reached for his phone to call for help, but the first thing he saw when he unlocked it was his chat with Nora. He tapped on it and unblocked her. 2 messages popped up, and he stared at them for a long time. Nora had never called him brother, but there it was on the screen, clear as day. A sudden panic seized Julian's heart. He quickly dialed her number. The phone rang for a long time before someone answered. Julian's voice trembled. "Eleonora, what do these messages mean?" The reply came from a man with a heavy regional accent, his voice thick with grief. "Hello, who is this?" "Teacher Meng." Teacher Meng was hit on the head by falling planks while saving a student. She has passed away." Julian's phone slipped from his hand and crashed to the floor, the screen spiderwebbing with cracks. The sound of rain and voices from the phone vanished. Julian's world went completely silent. Passed away. Nora passed away. How was that possible? She should be in a classroom right now, teaching. A prank call. It had to be a prank call. A sliver of hope flashed through Julian's mind. He scrambled to pick up the phone and called Nora's university program coordinator. The line rang and rang. Julian tore at the bow tie around his neck, gasping for air. The moment the call connected, he fired off his question, his voice desperate and pleading. "Eleonora Redwood." "Yes, she joined our rural teaching program. She left for the Redwood Mountains about a month ago. Didn't she discuss it with her family?" The taut string of his hope snapped. Julian's mind went blank. He opened his mouth to say something, but no sound came out. The coordinator called his name a few times, and when there was no reply, they hung up. The pain in his chest, which had briefly subsided, returned with a vengeance, as if 1,000 dull saws were tearing at his flesh. Beads of sweat broke out on his forehead and stung his eyes. Julian's hand, veins bulging, gripped the phone so tightly the muscles turned a purplish red. He forced himself to his feet and stumbled out of the room, clinging to the wall for support. The grand hall was filled with guests, a cheerful piano melody playing in the background. Countless people greeted him as he passed, but he didn't see them. He pushed through the crowd, a man who had lost his mind. But he was perfectly lucid. He knew exactly what he had to do. He shook off everyone who tried to stop him, ran to the garage, found his car, and slammed his foot on the accelerator, speeding toward the airport. It was midday on a weekend, and the roads were choked with traffic, but he didn't care. He ran red light after red light, the speeding alert blaring incessantly, like a death knell driving him mad. He smashed his fist into the console. The device went silent. A chunk of skin was torn from the back of his hand, and blood dripped onto the car's display screen, which had just switched to the midday news. At 10 o'clock this morning, due to severe weather, the Redwood Mountain region experienced a catastrophic geological disaster. A mudslide cascaded down from the mountains, causing severe damage to Redwood Elementary School. A female teacher at the school, in an attempt to rescue a student trapped in the building, was struck on the head by the collapsing wooden structure. Julian's breath caught in his throat. His empty eyes slowly moved to the screen. The news was broadcasting a live feed from the scene. A high-definition camera was focused on the school grounds, now a sea of mud and rain. 3 or 4 people in life vests were in a boat. On the boat was a stretcher. On the stretcher lay a figure, completely covered in mud, their features indistinguishable. No one watching knew who was on that stretcher, but Julian knew. Dangling from the hand, hanging limply over the side, was a string of Bodhi seed prayer beads. Julian had an identical one on his own wrist. Chapter 11, 12 years ago, after the car crash, Julian had been consumed by guilt, bedridden, and so racked with grief he was close to death. 10-year-old Nora, though still reeling from the sudden loss of her parents, had gone to a temple to pray for him to get better. She had brought back a string of Bodhi beads and placed it on his wrist. Perhaps it was the spirits of her parents watching over them, but Julian had slowly recovered. He took Nora back to the temple to give thanks and had a matching bracelet made for her. He had knelt before the statue, his heart filled with devotion. May the gods protect Nora and grant her a life free of sickness, hardship, and sorrow. May she live in peace until the end of her days. After making his vow, Julian had slipped the bracelet onto Nora's wrist. For more than a decade since, neither of them had ever taken off their Bodhi beads. The pain of the car crash had faded with time. The withdrawn Nora had slowly opened up, becoming a normal, happy girl. Julian had thought it was all over. He never expected to see that bracelet on the news. A flash of white light exploded in Julian's vision. A piercing electronic screech filled his mind, causing a splitting headache. He clenched the beads on his wrist, a raw, agonized roar tearing from his throat. The out-of-control car swerved wildly on the bridge before crashing through the guardrail and plunging into the river below. The sudden feeling of weightlessness made Julian tighten his grip instinctively. With a snap, the string of the bracelet broke. The brown beads scattered into the water. Julian did not die. His reckless speeding had been tracked by the traffic department. Police cars were already waiting to intercept him at the end of the bridge, so the crash was reported immediately. A rescue team arrived swiftly and pulled him from the wreckage, but he had been underwater for too long. He had lost consciousness due to lack of oxygen and was rushed to the hospital. When he finally woke up, 3 days had passed. The first thing Julian did was rip the IV from his arm and run for the door. It took 4 or 5 medical staff to chase him down and stop him at the hospital entrance. His mother, Eleanor, ran after him, breathless, tears streaming down her face as she pleaded with him. "Julian, don't panic, Nora is still alive." Those few words were like a tranquilizer, instantly calming the struggling Julian. He looked up, his bloodshot eyes filled with a hope born from despair. "Really?" The broken sound of his voice made Eleanor forget all sense of decorum. She threw her arms around her son. "Yes, really. Your father has already gone to the Redwood Mountains. He should be bringing Nora back for treatment this afternoon." The heart that had been on the verge of drowning was reborn with those words. Julian let out a long breath, and his weakened body suddenly went limp. The fear and relief of a near-death experience washed over Julian for the second time in 12 years. He collapsed into his mother's arms, tears streaming down his face, unstoppable. Nora's plane was scheduled to arrive at 6 p.m. Ignoring the doctor's advice, Julian insisted on going to the airport. He sat in the main hall in his hospital gown, attracting curious stares from passers-by. He paid them no mind. His eyes were glued to the large screen, waiting for her flight to arrive. At 5:50 p.m., the arrival announcement sounded. Julian stood up and ran to the gate. His heart was pounding, his breath catching in his throat with nervousness. Soon, his father's figure appeared in his line of sight. Behind him was a team of medical personnel pushing a transport bed. By the time the group reached the exit, Julian could wait no longer. He rushed forward and fell to his knees beside the bed, his eyes fixed on the person lying there. It had only been a little over a month, but Nora was so thin he almost didn't recognize her. Her forehead was wrapped in white gauze. Her face was so pale he could see the faint blue of her veins. Her eyes were sunken and dark, her lips a deep purple. Julian carefully raised his hand and took her skeletal wrist in his. Beneath his fingertips, he felt a faint, thready pulse. Chapter 12. The Hawthorne family brought the world's top neurosurgeons to the city to treat Nora. She was admitted to the intensive care unit under 24-hour surveillance. But Julian insisted on keeping vigil outside her door, refusing even to go to a room to sleep. No one could persuade him otherwise. When his assistant delivered the full report, Julian had been awake for nearly 13 hours. He rubbed his weary eyes, glanced at the monitors inside her room one more time to confirm everything was stable, then finally lowered his head to read the file. The report stated that Nora had signed up for the rural teaching program at the start of the semester and had gone to the Redwood Mountains in early September. In mid-October, she was injured by falling planks while saving a student. When the school principal pulled her from the rubble, at great risk to himself, she was no longer breathing. Believing she was dead, the principal had delivered the news to Julian over the phone. However, paramedics who arrived shortly after found a faint heartbeat and began emergency resuscitation while transporting her to the provincial hospital. The local school immediately reported the incident to the university administration. The program coordinator contacted Arthur Hawthorne, who flew to the mountains that very night. The medical facilities at the provincial hospital were limited. As soon as Nora's condition stabilized, Arthur had her transferred back to the city for treatment. After a full day of consultations, the team of specialists had devised a preliminary surgical plan. But the success rate was extremely low, in the single digits. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy. All the doctors looked at the three members of the Hawthorne family, waiting for them to make the final decision. Arthur let out a mournful sigh. Eleanor wept softly. Only Julian's expression remained relatively composed. He looked around the room, then bowed deeply to everyone. His voice was laced with pleading and sincerity. "You are all the most brilliant experts in your field. Nora's condition is critical, and the chances of success for this surgery are slim. But we have no choice but to take this risk. If there is anyone who can pull her back from the brink of death, I can only place my faith in all of you here." His heartfelt plea moved everyone in the room. The medical staff presented the surgical consent form. Julian signed his name without hesitation, bowed once more, and left. Julian didn't go to see Nora. He wandered aimlessly through the hospital, from the high-end VIP wards to the general wards, from the operating theaters to the pharmacy. Along the way, he passed countless people. Some faces glowed with the joy of recovery, others were contorted with the pain of illness. Staff bustled about, and families wept and cried out. Each person had their own story. No one stopped to offer a word of comfort to the haggard, lost-looking man. Julian eventually made his way to the basement and sat down. It was grim and cold here. A chill that went straight to the bone made him shiver. He looked up at the sign above the door. Morgue. The place was not unfamiliar to him. He had been here before. Back then, Uncle and Auntie Redwood had lain silently on the tables, covered from head to toe by white sheets. He had stood alone in that room for 12 hours before collapsing from exhaustion. As he fell, he had seen the towering flames again on the white ceiling. Uncle Redwood's last words echoed in his mind. "Julian, take care of Nora." Julian had promised. But how had his taking care of her led her to the ICU? Chapter 13. After leaving the morgue, Julian went to the cemetery. As he always did, he knelt before the gravestone and kowtowed 3 times. The various offerings were withered and yellowed by the sun. Julian carefully righted the ones that had toppled over. Everything that had happened here in August replayed in his mind. Back then, he had forced Nora to acknowledge their brother-sister relationship, but it was only to cover up his own guilt. He couldn't accept that Nora was in love with him, not because they were seen as siblings by the outside world. It was because he couldn't let Nora fall in love with the man who had killed her parents. Everyone thought he had been plagued by guilt for years because of Mr. Redwood's final, life-saving act. But that wasn't the whole truth. In Julian's mind, he was single-handedly responsible for the destruction of Nora's family. If he hadn't suggested the driver take the national highway to avoid traffic, would the accident have ever happened? That's why Julian had done everything in his power to make it up to her. He had cherished Nora as his own sister, wanting to ensure her a lifetime of peace and happiness. But his sister had fallen in love with him. The pain he had suppressed for so long erupted overnight, completely drowning him. He tried every method to correct Nora's feelings, but nothing worked. Seeing Nora's actions become more and more audacious, Julian had no choice but to turn to Clarissa, who had been pursuing him relentlessly. He brought Clarissa home, thinking Nora would finally give up. But she only became more reckless, to the point where even his parents found out. Julian felt he had no other option but to send her away. Julian had been playing the part of Nora's brother for 12 years. Before her accident, he believed he had a clear conscience. But when he received the news of her death, Julian began to doubt himself for the first time. "You promised Mr. Redwood you would take care of Nora for her whole life, didn't you? Why did you have to push her so far away? Once you have your own family and she has hers, she will drift further and further from you. There will be less and less you can do for her. How, then, can you take care of her for a lifetime?" This thought had reached its peak as he plunged into the water. Before he lost consciousness in the river, one sentence played over and over in his mind. "Julian, if the accident had never happened, if my last name was still Redwood, would we have been together?" A month ago, Julian's answer had been impossible. But in the face of death, all the desires Julian had so carefully concealed were stripped bare. If he could do it all over again, his answer would be a single word: yes. If the accident had never happened, if Eleonora Redwood had never changed her name, they would have been together. Julian Hawthorne was in love with Eleonora Redwood. Not the love of a brother for a sister, but the love of a man for a woman. The seed of that feeling had been planted when they were very young. Back then, Mr. Redwood had joked about arranging a marriage between them. Julian hadn't understood what that meant. His mother had smiled and explained that it meant he and Nora would be together forever and never be separated. Little Julian had thought, "That sounds great. I'd love to be with Nora forever." But that feeling had never been given the chance to blossom before it was severed by tragedy. Regret and guilt had buried the feelings Julian had yet to fully understand. But love is love. Even when hidden deep in the heart, unseen by the light of day, it will still grow new branches. The punch he threw at Clarissa's cousin, the black diary he took, the moment of hesitation in the bridal shop, each and every one was a testament to his undeniable love. It was just a shame that Julian had understood it all too late. Far too late. Chapter 14 Twilight gradually enveloped the landscape. Julian's legs had gone numb from kneeling. He had knelt in the cemetery all day, praying to Mr. and Mrs. Redwood to watch over Nora and ensure her surgery was successful. As he was leaving, the cemetery caretaker brought him a black umbrella, saying the girl who had been with him last time had left it behind. There was no rain, but Julian opened the umbrella anyway. A pair of white butterflies fluttered down and landed on the handle. As Julian walked out of the cemetery gates, the butterflies took flight, disappearing back into the darkness within. He turned, watched them vanish, then looked up at the newly lit street lamp. The heart that had been adrift at sea for so long had finally found its shore. Before Nora was taken into surgery, Julian made a request at her bedside. "Mom, Dad, if Nora's surgery is successful and she wakes up, I want you to sign the papers to dissolve the adoption." The sudden proposal was incomprehensible to his parents. Julian offered a few excuses, saying Nora's birth chart clashed with the Hawthorne name, that Mr. Redwood had visited him in a dream. Arthur and Eleanor, who had always been somewhat superstitious, looked at their unconscious adopted daughter and quickly agreed. Whether it was divine intervention or not, the surgery went exceptionally smoothly. When the light above the operating room door went out without any sign of trouble, the family's anxieties finally settled. Nora had a dream, a very long dream. In the dream, she was Julian's biological sister. From a young age, she had disliked her strict older brother and had always kept her distance. But Julian seemed to enjoy making trouble for her. He would punish her for not finishing her homework, scold her for being a picky eater, and even report her to their parents for writing a love letter to the most handsome boy in the class next door. Nora was endlessly annoyed. She thought, if only Julian wasn't my real brother. Then she could write him a love letter as a prank, just to see the look on his face. It would probably scare him half to death, but alas, they were truly related by blood. So from birth until death, Nora never found a way to get her revenge. At the end of the dream, she was an old woman with white hair, lying on her deathbed. Her brother, who had never had a kind word for her, sat by her side with a smile on his face. His face was also wrinkled, like dry tree bark, but his eyes were not cloudy. They were still as bright as a young man's. He leaned in close to her ear and whispered softly, "Nora, I love you." Drowsy and fading, Nora no longer had the strength to reply, but in her heart she scoffed, "You're my brother. Of course you have to love me." Seeing her close her eyes, Julian whispered again, his voice even softer, like a feather brushing against Nora's heart, making it itch. Not that kind of love. The other kind. Nora's consciousness was already hazy. She couldn't understand what that kind of love and the other kind meant. Weren't they brother and sister? All love was the same kind of love, wasn't it? Why did he have to be so specific? A blinding white light shone down, and Nora awoke from her deep sleep. She slowly opened her eyes. The blurry figure before her gradually came into focus. Oh, it was Julian, her brother. Chapter 15, Brother, you look terrible. Have you not been taking care of yourself this past month? Nora's first words upon waking made the smile on Julian's face freeze. What did you say? Nora's voice was light and airy, clearly weak. I said you look terrible. Julian shook his head. No, not that part. Nora's head was still foggy. She thought for a long time but couldn't figure out what he meant. Had she said something foolish in her dream again? No way in her dream. She had cursed Julian out completely. He couldn't have heard all of it, could he? Nora was suddenly filled with guilt. Her eyes darted around like someone caught in the act. She stammered, "Even though I meant everything I said, I didn't mean any harm. We're brother and sister, after all. You can forgive my past foolishness, right?" Julian's heart seized. The surprise and joy on his face were instantly replaced by a wave of disappointment. Even his voice grew heavy. "Get some rest. I'll come see you tomorrow." With that, Julian turned and hurried away. Nora was left bewildered, still trying to figure it out. Which line from her dream had she let slip? Julian didn't go far. He sat on a bench just outside her room, staring at the white wall for the entire night. That brother, that meant everything, that brother and sister, kept replaying in his mind. Combined with Nora's evasive gaze, it threw Julian's heart into turmoil. He had a nagging feeling that something was wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Julian opened his phone and looked at the last 2 messages Nora had sent before the accident. Her final words at death's door had been a wish for his happiness, and she had called him brother. Her first words after surviving were to call him brother, followed by an apology for her past foolishness. Could it be that her brush with death had truly extinguished her love for him? The moment the thought occurred, Julian's already gloomy expression darkened further. His heart skipped a beat, and 1,000 panicked thoughts flew out, crashing around inside him. Lost in his chaotic thoughts, Julian didn't notice Clarissa sit down beside him. He only snapped out of it when a hand with pink painted nails touched his arm. "Julian, you haven't had a proper rest in ages. Your sister is awake now. You should come home with me." Julian smoothly pulled his arm away and shifted an inch to the side, creating distance between them. "I'm fine. You can go back by yourself. Also, our engagement ceremony was never completed. You shouldn't call Nora sister. Just use her name." Julian's first sentence made Clarissa feel wronged. His second left her stunned. She had called Nora sister since the day they met, and he had never stopped her. Now, when they were just 1 step away from marriage, he was suddenly making an issue of it. "Julian, what are you trying to say?" Clarissa couldn't say what was really on her mind. She could only ask cautiously. "So, after the engagement ceremony is complete, I can go back to calling her sister?" Julian's frown deepened. He was unhappy with both of her statements, especially the second one. First, Nora and I are not siblings. She's changing her last name back to Redwood soon. It's not appropriate for you to call her sister. Second, our relationship ends here. Let's just be friends from now on. Chapter 16, Julian's words were completely unexpected. Clarissa became flustered, her words tumbling out in a stammer. "Julian, didn't we agree to get married in November? I've already sent out the invitations to my friends. Everyone knows." Are you joking?" Julian stood up and smoothed the wrinkled sleeve that she had touched, his voice firm and resolute. "I'm not joking, Clarissa. I am officially informing you today. We are breaking up." With that, Julian turned and walked down the hall without a hint of reluctance. His words stung Clarissa. She watched his retreating back, then suddenly stood up, her voice filled with certainty. "Julian, are you breaking up with me because of Eleonora?" Julian stopped in his tracks. He turned back, grabbed Clarissa's arm, and dragged her down the stairs. The pain in her arm made Clarissa struggle. In her anger, she blurted out, "Julian, you've fallen in love with your own sister, haven't you? That's why you're breaking up with me. Eleonora is your sister, how could you be so desperate? Have you forgotten the oath you swore to her parents? If your parents knew about your disgusting thoughts, would they regret ever bringing her into your home? A jinx like Eleonora should have just died in those mountains." Crack. The sound of Julian's hand striking Clarissa's face echoed in the quiet stairwell. The blow made her see stars. A red handprint appeared on her pale skin. She leaned against the wall to keep from falling. Julian's eyes were filled with nothing but crazed, dark fury. "Nora and I are not related by blood. She is about to change her name back to Redwood. What our relationship will be in the future is none of an outsider's business. If you know what's good for you, you'll shut your mouth and get out of here. If you ever dare to curse Nora again, I'll show you who the real jinx is." Clarissa had never seen such a dark expression on Julian's face. His threatening words sent a cold sweat down her back. She didn't dare say another word. She picked up her fallen purse and fled in a panic. As her figure disappeared around the corner, Julian's expression finally softened. He rubbed his stinging hand and continued toward the private lounge. When he pushed open the door, he saw his parents standing just inside, staring at him in shock. Remembering what had just happened, his mind instantly went into chaos. "Dad, Mom, how long have you been here?" Arthur looked at him sternly. "Long enough, we heard everything." Julian was speechless. He lowered his head, a flicker of conflict in his eyes. Eleanor could no longer control her emotions. She raised her hand and slapped him across the face. "We treated Nora like our own daughter. It's one thing for her to be young and foolish, but how could you indulge in this madness with her? No wonder you wanted us to sign those papers to dissolve the adoption. It was because you wanted to." Eleanor, a woman from a scholarly family, couldn't bring herself to say the ugly words. She stopped mid-sentence. Julian didn't flinch, taking the full force of the slap. Nurses on the early shift were starting to arrive on the floor. Julian closed the door, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Too many people here. Let's talk inside." Chapter 17, Julian confessed his feelings for Nora to his parents. He also told them the full story of why the car accident had happened. When he finished, both Arthur and Eleanor fell silent. They had never imagined that the son they had raised would develop feelings for their late friend's daughter. Even less had they imagined the hidden truth behind the tragic accident. The three of them sat in the lounge for a long time, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, it was Julian who broke the silence. "Mom, when I was little, you joked with Uncle Redwood about arranging a marriage for us. I was so happy back then. I wanted to grow up quickly so I could be with Nora. I didn't know then that I was in love with her. After Uncle and Auntie Redwood passed away, you adopted Nora, and I just focused on being a good brother. But after Nora came of age and confessed to me, all these strange thoughts started popping into my head. I couldn't control them, so I threw myself into my work, working late every day to avoid her. Dad, I used to think that as long as I treated Nora as my sister, I could take care of her for her whole life. But after her accident, I finally understood. If she's only my sister, she will eventually get married, have children, and leave my side. If something happened to her again and I was too far away to save her, I would regret it for the rest of my life." Julian's heartfelt confession brought a pang of sadness to the old couple. It was true they had once considered a union with the Redwood family. But after the accident, all they felt for Nora was pity. They weren't sure if Nora even liked their son and didn't want her to feel pressured into the marriage because she was living under their roof. As they saw the two develop a stable sibling relationship, the idea had slowly faded. When they overheard Nora's feverish confession, Julian had just brought home a girlfriend and had always referred to himself as her brother. The old couple wanted their son to be happy and didn't want to be the subject of gossip, so they went along with Julian's wishes and sent Nora away. But they never expected that just a few months later, Nora would be on the brink of death in the mountains. The news had nearly scared them to death, and they felt they could never face their departed friends. Then their own son had his accident and nearly drowned. The old couple's hair had turned white overnight. Now, their son was safe, Nora was awake, and they had unexpectedly learned of their son's hidden feelings. This series of blows had caught Arthur and Alina completely off guard, but after listening to their son, their hearts began to soften. First, the two children loved each other, they would be together willingly. Second, Nora had grown up right before their eyes. They trusted her completely. Third, Nora had no other family, they truly wouldn't be at ease marrying her off to someone else. It was best to keep her close. But there was one thing that still troubled Arthur. He patted Julian's shoulder and, after a long hesitation, finally spoke. "Julian, we can discuss everything else, but does Nora know the truth about the accident? If you hide this from her, and she finds out one day, the damage it would cause would be irreparable." Arthur's words were the very thing Julian feared most. Should he tell Nora the truth? Could she handle it? Chapter 18, after waking up, Nora's biggest concern was for her students back in the Redwood Mountains. She called the principal, and only after confirming that everyone was safe did she finally breathe a sigh of relief. Her life-saving actions had garnered widespread attention. The university, considering her injuries, was prepared to end her internship early. But Nora took the initiative to apply to continue it. When Julian received this news, he was so angry he rushed to her hospital room immediately. "Do you have no regard for your own well-being? Why are you so insistent on going back to those mountains?" Having faced death, Nora had, in fact, figured many things out. During her time in the mountains, the children's resilient spirit, their will to thrive against all odds, had slowly awakened something in her. She began to realize that she had been too absorbed in her own romantic feelings, neglecting her own life and purpose. So she had decided to return to the mountains, to do what little she could for the children. Faced with Julian's questioning, Nora didn't rush to defend herself. She took out her phone and showed him the photos she had taken during her time there. "Brother, I used to not understand why you always said I was young and foolish. After going to the mountains, I think I finally understand. When I stepped out of the Hawthorne home and into the real world with its 1,000 different faces, when I saw more of the world and met more people, I stopped being that naive little girl who knew nothing of sorrow. I have things I want to do, people I want to help, and a dream I want to fight for." Julian looked at the small, dark-skinned children on the phone screen. For some reason, he was reminded of the 10-year-old Nora, who had just lost her parents. "When the mudslide hit, I had already made it to safety. But when I saw a disabled mother crying her heart out for her child trapped in the school, I was suddenly reminded of my own mom. That's why I went back. When I jumped into that muddy water, I wasn't just trying to save that poor mother and child. I was also trying to save my own mom and dad." Hearing this, Julian felt a lump form in his throat, and he couldn't speak. In those mountains, there are many children who are born without parents. They don't have enough to eat or warm clothes to wear, but they still study hard, hoping to one day leave the mountains. They carry heavy baskets on their backs to help their families. They are so grateful for any kindness I show them. So, I want to go back. It's not because I'm being reckless or don't care about myself. It's because I want to help them. Brother, in saving them, wasn't I also saving the 10-year-old me? The room was silent for a long time. It had been many years since Julian had heard Nora talk about the past, so long that he thought she had forgotten everything. It turned out she remembered it all. The little girl who used to only revolve around him had finally grown up. For some reason, an indescribable sourness filled Julian's heart. He looked up, his eyes filled with a hint of shame. "Nora, the car accident back then, it happened because I suggested the driver take a different route." Nora was stunned. Fragments of memories flashed through her mind. The questions that had plagued her for years were answered in that single sentence. No wonder Julian was so haunted by what happened. He had blamed it all on himself. Apart from a fleeting moment of surprise and understanding, Nora's face showed no trace of blame. "Brother, no wonder you felt so guilty about the past for so long, so that's why." "But brother, the person responsible for the accident was the drunk driver, not you. You were a victim too. It wasn't your fault." The tears he had held back for a decade finally burst forth at her words. Julian covered his face and wept for a long time. Nora knew those tears were from 12 years ago, so she didn't interrupt him. She just waited quietly for him to finish, then handed him a tissue. A heavy burden had finally been lifted. Chapter 19, Julian promised Nora that as soon as she recovered, he would let her return to the Redwood Mountains to complete her internship. With that settled, only one thing still weighed on his mind. Since her return, Nora had consistently called him brother. He had hinted, both directly and indirectly, many times that he had broken off his engagement with Clarissa and that she could go back to calling him by his name. But she had become surprisingly polite and respectful, never again calling him by his first name. He didn't know what to do to get her to treat him as she had before the accident, and it left him feeling dejected for a long time. After she was discharged from the hospital, Julian brought Nora back to the Hawthorne estate to recuperate. Her food, lodging, and all other arrangements were restored to how they had been before. Nora didn't seem to feel much about it. She was busy preparing her plans and packing for her return to the mountains, her days filled with purpose. But Julian couldn't sit still. He would wander into her room several times a day, casually bringing up things from the past, trying to steer the conversation toward their relationship. Nora, however, didn't want to talk about it. She now genuinely saw Julian as her brother, so she skillfully dodged the topic every time. Once she had fully recovered, she simply placed her medical clearance on the living room table and flew back to the mountains with her luggage. When her plane landed, she was met at the airport entrance by Julian. She looked at the displeased man before her, feeling a little guilty as she spoke. "Brother, what are you doing in the mountains?" Julian was fuming, and it took a great deal of effort to control his tone. "You've just recovered from a major illness. Why did you run back here alone without discussing it with the family?" "Well, I'm all better now. I was getting restless at home, and I was worried about the school and the children, so I thought I'd come bring them some winter clothes." Restless at home. Why, was it because she didn't want to see me? Julian's heart sank, and his voice took on a hint of disappointment. "You should have at least told me first." Nora nodded quickly. "Okay, from now on, I'll be sure to tell you everything first, brother." The word brother stabbed Julian's heart again. He couldn't hold it in any longer and asked the question that had been tormenting him for weeks. "Nora, why have you been calling me brother ever since you came back?" Nora was surprised by the question. "Isn't that what you always wanted me to call you?" A sharp pain shot through Julian's heart. "What if I asked you not to call me brother? To go back to calling me by my name?" Nora didn't understand the meaning behind his words. She busied herself with her luggage and answered casually. "We're brother and sister. I should call you brother, shouldn't I?" Julian was speechless, unable to find a reason to refute her. He clenched his fists, then relaxed them, an indescribable sourness rising in his throat. "Then why did you refuse to call me that before?" Nora smiled, a gentle and relieved expression on her face. "I was young and foolish back then. I caused you a lot of trouble, but I'm grown up now. I won't put you in a difficult position anymore. Brother, I'm going to go find my own path in life now. Goodbye." With that, Nora waved and walked away with her luggage, leaving Julian standing there alone. The words stuck in his throat fell into the empty air. "Your future, can you take me with you?" Chapter 20, Nora returned to the familiar school grounds. The old classrooms and dormitories had been completely destroyed by the mudslide, but thankfully, new ones had already been built. The principal led Nora to her new dormitory. The spacious and clean new room would no longer turn into a mud pit when it rained. Nora's heart was filled with joy. After putting her things down, she hurried to the classroom with her textbooks. When she pushed open the door, the scene inside left her stunned. More than 20 parents stood beside their children's desks, their faces filled with emotion as they looked at her. Leo walked forward, holding his mother's hand, and placed a wreath made of plum blossoms on her head. The mountain people were not ones for fancy words, so the only sound in the classroom was thunderous applause. But Nora was so moved she was on the verge of tears. She hugged Leo's mother, then walked to the front of the class, picked up a piece of chalk, and began to write on the blackboard. 15 pairs of clear eyes were fixed on the board. Stroke by stroke, Nora wrote with great care. When she finished, she turned to the class and called out, "Class, let's begin." Everyone bowed deeply to her. Julian hadn't left. He had followed her to the school, and from the window, he watched Nora's first class back. When the resounding chorus of "Good morning, Teacher Meng" filled the air, he finally understood why Nora was so determined to return to this place. For the past 20 years, as Nora had grown up, her material needs had been met, but her spirit had remained somewhat empty. But here, in this poor mountain valley, Nora had slowly shed the identities of the Hawthorns' adopted daughter, the last of the Redwoods, and Julian's sister. Here, everyone just called her Teacher Meng. Her name stood alone, without any embellishments. She was no longer an appendage to someone else. Nora had become herself again, rediscovering her true purpose. A purpose that was for herself alone. Through the glass window, Julian watched Nora on the platform, her expression focused as she explained the lesson, guiding the children to new knowledge. He had never seen this side of Nora before, but one look was all it took. He couldn't tear his eyes away. Julian's heart swelled, and a love so immense it could no longer be contained seemed ready to overflow. After the class, the parents came forward with cloth sacks, taking turns shaking Nora's hand and insisting on giving her local produce from their homes. Nora had never experienced anything like this and was a bit flustered. She tried to refuse, but the parents surrounded her, pressing bag after bag into her arms. After seeing the last parent off, Nora looked at the gifts piled high on her desk and sighed. She wondered what to do with everything. She decided to take the food to the school cafeteria, give the useful items to the logistics department, and take the small decorative trinkets back to her dorm. It was a good plan, but the items were too heavy. Nora tried to drag them, but they wouldn't budge. I'll have to ask the principal for help. Just as she was thinking this, the classroom door was pushed open. Julian walked in, backlit by the light, and took the bags from her hands. "Let me, where does this go?" When Nora saw who it was, she froze. "Brother, what are you doing here? Weren't you supposed to go back to the city?" Julian gave her a very reasonable-sounding excuse. "If I don't check on how you're living and eating, how can I report back to Mom and Dad?" Chapter 21. With that excuse, Julian successfully convinced Nora to find him a place to stay. He wasn't used to the conditions here, but seeing her so happy, he could tolerate the hardship. At first, Nora took good care of him. But after a week, when she realized Julian had no intention of leaving, she couldn't resist trying to shoo him away. "Brother, isn't the company busy? Can it really manage without you?" "It's not too busy. Dad's there, you don't have to worry." "Brother, you've been here for a week and you're still not leaving. I feel like I'm troubling the principal, and I feel bad about it. I think the principal is very happy to have me here. He's even planning on having me substitute teach." "Brother, you grew up in luxury. The conditions here are too poor. If you're not used to it, you should just go back." "I'm very used to it." They went back and forth several times, but Julian always had an excuse. Nora had no other choice but to call home. But for some reason, Arthur and Alina were also in favor of him staying, saying it was so he could take care of her. Nora couldn't figure out what this family was up to. She had to go find Julian and get a straight answer. "Brother, why are you so determined to stay in the mountains?" Julian was counting out homework assignments for the winter break. He turned to look at Nora's serious face and knew he couldn't fool her this time. So he came up with a new reason. "Mom and Dad said that your teaching here is a good deed, and they want to contribute too. So they asked me to come and investigate first to see what this area really needs. Then, the company will establish a foundation to help the mountain children with their living and educational problems." Nora's gloomy mood vanished in an instant. She was so excited she was practically jumping up and down. "Really? Brother, you're not lying to me, are you?" Julian nodded. He wasn't lying to her. Well, he was lying a little. The idea was something he had just come up with and hadn't discussed with his family yet. But his parents had always been passionate about charity, so it would likely be approved without issue. His time in the mountains had moved him deeply, and he genuinely wanted to improve the living and learning conditions for the children here. More importantly, he knew that Nora would be overjoyed by this foundation. For him, that was enough. After hearing the news, Nora stopped trying to get rid of him. She even volunteered to participate in the foundation's aid activities, and Julian agreed. From that day on, in addition to preparing her lessons, Nora began visiting students' homes to investigate their situations firsthand. The mountain roads were steep and treacherous. Worried about her going alone, Julian accompanied her on her journeys over the mountains and through the valleys. Chapter 22. Although they had some idea of what to expect before they went, what they actually saw and heard left both of their hearts heavy. Nora, being younger and having never witnessed such hardship, couldn't help but cry on the way back. Julian's heart was heavy too, but he tried his best to comfort her. Don't cry, Nora. We'll go back and figure something out. The children's lives will get better. Nora wiped her tears and forced a smile. I know you'll find a way. You're the best brother in the world. But those words made Julian's heart sink. He looked at the smile on Nora's face, which looked more painful than crying, and could no longer suppress the emotions surging within him. Nora, can I not be your brother? Nora was taken aback by his words. Her hand froze. Why? Didn't you always want me to call you brother? Julian took a step forward, wanting to take her hand. I was wrong. I was wrong about everything before. I shouldn't have forced you to call me brother. You never thought of me as a brother, did you? This time, Nora finally understood what he meant. The old her would have been overjoyed to hear these words. But the current her felt only a calm stillness in her heart. She pulled her hand away from his and took 2 steps back, creating distance between them. You think you were wrong before, and I think I was wrong before. So, who was right and who was wrong? I don't know why you're bringing this up, but I think the past is in the past. We shouldn't dwell on who was right or wrong. Can't we just live our lives as brother and sister? Brother, Julian felt as if his heart were being slowly sliced by a dull knife. The intense pain spread from his chest, making it almost impossible to breathe. No, Nora, we are not brother and sister. We have no blood relation. Julian forced out the words with difficulty. Nora lowered her eyes. Brother, what you're saying is true, but in the eyes of the world, I am your sister. Whether we're related by blood or not, that is also an undeniable fact. Why do you care what other people think? Nora, you never used to say things like this. It had been a long time since Nora had seen Julian so flustered. Chapter 23, she looked up at the person she had grown up with. He seemed the same as before, yet somehow different. Perhaps it's not him who has changed, but me, Nora thought. You never used to say things like this either, brother. You were the one who told me, again and again, that we could only be brother and sister. You even forced me to swear on my parents' grave. I remember all of it. Have you forgot? I'm calling you brother, just like you wanted. Why have you changed your mind now? Why don't you want me to call you that anymore? Julian was on the verge of breaking. The words he had once used to make Nora give up now came rushing back at him, becoming the sharp blades that pierced his heart. His voice was already hoarse. Nora, please give me another chance. I love you. Nora didn't answer. A complex mix of emotions flickered in her eyes. Scenes from the past flashed before her. At 18, she had written a confession of her girlish crush, only to have Julian tear it to pieces in front of her. At 19, she had flown all the way to Los Angeles to celebrate his birthday, only to be sent back home without even seeing him. At 20, she had gotten drunk and mustered the courage to call him and tell him how she felt, only for him to start living at the office, not even attending her birthday party. At 21, she had talked in her sleep, and after being overheard by his parents, Julian had sent her away. The Julian who had so vehemently rejected her love in the past was now standing in front of her, telling her he loved her. Nora felt as if it were all a dream. Not unreal like a dream, but unworthy of being remembered like a dream. She was no longer the person in that dream, so in the end she said only one thing, "It's getting dark, let's go back, brother." From then on, Nora often avoided Julian, but the school was too small. No matter where she hid, he would find her. Julian would say nothing, just follow her silently. As the Lunar New Year approached, the school closed for the winter break. Julian bought 2 plane tickets home and handed one to Nora. She took it without a word. They flew back to the city on the same flight. Arthur and Alina had prepared a large feast to welcome them back. But the moment the 2 of them walked in, the strange atmosphere between them was palpable to the old couple. While Nora went upstairs to put away her luggage, they cornered Julian. Did you talk to Nora? What did she say? Chapter 24, at the mention of this, Julian's expression darkened. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. I told her, but Nora hasn't made up her mind. She might need some more time to think. Arthur and Alina were experienced enough to guess the outcome from their son's face. They sighed in unison. Julian, if Nora isn't willing, you need to let it go and not force her. Being brother and sister is already a great destiny. You can't force matters of the heart. But Julian didn't hear a word of his mother's comforting advice. He had already missed countless chances. He was not going to let this one go. At dinner, seeing the tense atmosphere, Julian took the initiative to bring up the foundation for the Redwood Mountains. The moment the topic was raised, Nora visibly brightened. eagerly describing her ideas to the two elders. Julian chimed in at the right moments to add details. The awkwardness that had hung between them for the past half-month finally broke during their joint presentation. Naturally, Arthur and Alina were fully supportive of the project. Nora was overjoyed to hear the decision-makers give their approval. She stood up and insisted on toasting them on behalf of the children in the mountains. The two elders graciously drank to her toast. Nora then raised her glass to Julian. Her eyes shone as she looked at him, and her voice was filled with excitement. "Here's to a successful collaboration on our foundation project." After the holidays, Julian returned to the company, and Nora returned to the university. He would visit her at school once a week. Nora was busy with her thesis and couldn't always meet him. Even when they did meet, she would always stand a couple of steps away, politely and respectfully calling him brother. At times like these, Julian's fiery heart would feel as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over it. His only way to close the distance between them was to bring up the foundation. This tactic worked every time. As soon as he mentioned the children in the mountains, Nora would forget to keep her distance and would happily lean in to chat with him. Only in these moments did Julian feel that the old Nora had returned. In April, the Foundation's aid plan began to take shape. Julian flew to see Nora with the latest proposal. He couldn't reach her by phone, so he waited for her outside her dormitory. It was from her roommate that he learned of her plans to apply for the Western Region Teaching Program. After looking up the details of the program, Julian's heart was once again in turmoil. Chapter 25. If Nora's application was successful, she would have to go to the Western Region for 5 years. Knowing her personality, she would probably decide to stay there permanently after the 5 years were up, perhaps never even returning to the city. Julian could see this outcome clearly, but he couldn't accept it. It wasn't that he couldn't accept Nora not coming back. It was that he couldn't accept her abandoning him to go to the Western Region and not come back. His father was getting older. He would soon be taking over the Hawthorne Group, and his life would become increasingly busy, leaving him no time or energy to frequently travel to the West. If Nora was determined to put down roots in the West, how would he ever be able to mend their relationship? Julian decided he had to have a serious talk with Nora. He knew that playing the emotional card wouldn't work, so he got straight to the point. "Nora, are you planning to apply for the Western Region program?" Nora didn't deny it. She was indeed preparing her application. She also knew Julian was here to persuade her not to go, so she didn't hide it. "Yes, brother. Are you here to convince me not to go?" The confirmation still made Julian's heart sink, but he had already thought of a strategy before coming, so his emotions didn't fluctuate too much. "Nora, you want to go teach in the West because you saw so many children in need in the mountains, and you want to help more people, right?" Seeing Nora nod, Julian felt more confident. "You might think I'm here today to stop you from going to the West, and you're not wrong. That is my ultimate goal, but I hope you'll listen to my reasons before you make your decision." Nora was curious to hear what reasons he could possibly have to convince her. Your classmates who are applying for the program probably have the same desire to help people as you do. They have kind hearts, so even though they know the path is difficult, they are fearless. You're the same, right? But you're not the same as your classmates. Their family backgrounds are relatively ordinary, so they can only burn themselves out to light the way for those students and achieve their dreams. But you have the backing of the Hawthorne family. You can do so much more for the children. Nora, have you ever considered that, as a member of the Hawthorne family, you could have a much greater impact by organizing charitable foundations from the rear than by teaching in person on the front lines? Your classmates would also be able to avoid a lot of pain and trouble in achieving their dreams with your help, allowing their pure love not to be tainted with blood and tears. You're about to graduate, and I don't know what your plans are for the future, but I've come today with the initial proposal for the foundation. You can join the team whenever you're ready and make a real difference for the children, creating a better life for them. I believe that in this team, the light you shine will illuminate the future of many more children. Chapter 26. After Julian finished speaking, Nora was silent for a long time. She had to admit she was moved by his words. If she submitted her application, her identity would be that of an ordinary volunteer teacher. She might be able to help a small number of students leave the mountains, but her power would be minimal. But if she joined the Hawthorne Group's foundation, she could not only do more but also help more people. If she wanted to be the lamp that lit up a dark room, why confine herself to a small classroom? Nora gave up her application for the Western Region program and agreed to Julian's proposal. Although he had been 90 sure, it wasn't until he saw her nod that Julian finally let out a long sigh of relief. But Nora's next question made his heart flutter again. "Brother, this talk you gave me today, was it out of a sense of public duty, or was it for your own personal reasons?" Julian looked at the serious expression on her face, his heart wavering. But in the end, he chose to be honest. 70% selfish reasons, 30% public duty. "Nora, I don't want to lie to you." It had been a long time since Nora had heard Julian speak to her in such an approachable tone. After the accident, he had always acted as her brother, his words and actions carrying an air of fraternal authority. Nora disliked that feeling. She missed the Julian from before she was 12, the one who would hold her hand and skip school with her to go on picnics. The person she loved was that vibrant, sincere Julian, not the one wearing the mask of a brother, a tiger in sheep's clothing. She was happy to see the Julian of her childhood again, so this time she didn't call him brother, nor did she blame him for his selfish motives. "Eleonora Redwood thanks you for your selfish reasons, Julian Hawthorne." Hearing her full, original name, Julian felt a little unaccustomed. He suddenly thought of something else, something that seemed perfect to bring up now. "Nora, Mom, Dad, and I are planning to name the foundation after both the Hawthorne and Redwood families. What do you think?" Nora hadn't expected them to think of that, so she considered it for a long time. After her parents died, all their assets had been divided among their relatives. In all the years she had lived with the Hawthornes, the Redwoods had never once asked about her, as if she had died in the crash with her parents. Although she wanted to include the Redwood name in the foundation, the Redwood family had contributed neither money nor effort. She felt it wasn't right. So, in the end, Nora refused. But Julian didn't give up. Chapter 27, "Mom and Dad knew you wouldn't agree, which is why they sent me to talk to you. We've never forgotten the debt we owe to your father for saving my life. But he is gone, and there is little we, the living, can do. This foundation is a charitable endeavor. We want to include the Redwood name so that even after you and I are gone, your parents will always be remembered." Nora had no reason to refuse anymore. Julian pressed his advantage. "The thing is, your parents passed away many years ago, and the other Redwoods are less than reputable. If the project is officially established, we might need a Redwood family member to attend events. Nora, that person can only be you. But your last name is Hawthorne now, which isn't suitable for representing the Redwood family. Mom, Dad, and I were thinking, since you're an adult now, why not dissolve the adoption agreement? You can change your name back to Redwood, and then you can legitimately participate in the project. With you on the team, no one will have any objections to the name." His reasoning was sound. Considering the practicalities, Nora agreed. In June, Nora graduated. She returned to the city and joined the Hawthorne Group, officially becoming a member of the Foundation's project team. In July, her adoption by the Hawthorne family was officially dissolved, and she changed her name back to Eleonora Redwood. After changing her name, she moved out of the Hawthorne home and rented her own apartment. The next morning, she opened her door only to see Julian emerging from the apartment across the hall, greeting her with a wide smile. Nora finally understood why he hadn't tried harder to make her stay. So this was his plan, but now, not only was she not the Hawthornes' adopted daughter, but she was also their employee. So she didn't comment on the matter. However, her direct supervisor, Mr. Hawthorne, was taking things a bit too far. Not only did he pressure this new employee into letting him carpool with her to and from work every day, but he also used his authority as her boss to demand she have meals with him. Nora endured it for 3 days before she finally couldn't take it anymore. The next time Julian uninvitedly sat in her passenger seat, she made a tactful suggestion. "Mr. Hawthorne, you have your own private car and a personal driver. Why do you insist on riding in my beat-up little car?" Julian was in a good mood, a smile playing on his lips as he spoke. "It's Mom's birthday today. I'm under orders to escort you home for dinner. Besides, isn't it natural for a sister to give her brother a ride?" She didn't need him to tell her. Nora was going to go home today anyway. She took a deep breath. My last name is Redwood, Mr. Hawthorne. Your last name is Hawthorne. We are not brother and sister anymore." This was the exact sentence Julian had been waiting for. He fastened his seatbelt, his tone laced with a hint of ambiguity. "I'm very happy to hear you confirm that, Nora. You're right. We are not brother and sister anymore." Chapter 28. In the end, Nora couldn't get Julian out of her car. When they arrived at the Hawthorne estate, she went to get a gift from the back seat, and by the time she turned around, Julian was gone. She had been so hounded by him lately that his sudden absence felt strange. But she knew the Hawthorne house like the back of her hand. Julian's presence, or lack thereof, didn't matter. It wasn't a milestone birthday, so Alina had declined visits from many relatives and friends, preparing just a small, simple dinner in the living room. The first thing Nora did upon entering was wish the birthday girl a happy birthday. Alina was overjoyed to see her and hugged her warmly. Arthur was playing chess in the living room. Nora watched for a while, then peeked into the kitchen to see the food, and then took a stroll through the garden. When she came back inside, she headed upstairs, intending to check on her old room, but ran into Julian on the landing, holding a large painting. She tried to go left. He blocked the way with the painting. She tried to go right. He blocked the way with his body. After 4 or 5 attempts, Nora finally lost her patience. "Get out of the way," such an impatient tone would have certainly annoyed the old Julian, but the current him seemed to enjoy her frustration. "I'm busy. I was blocking you because I need a favor. On the top shelf of my bookshelf there's a dictionary. I hid a gift inside it. Can you bring it down for me?" He then moved aside. Nora muttered under her breath as she went up the stairs, "I'm not helping you." Julian turned and watched her disappear around the corner, a smile playing on his lips. He knew she would help. The last time Nora had been in Julian's room was before she turned 18. Ever since she had given him that letter, his room had been kept locked, the only forbidden territory for her in the Hawthorne house. So when she pushed open the door and saw that the room's layout and furnishings were exactly as they had been years ago, she felt a surreal sense of traveling back in time. She found a stool, climbed up, and found the dictionary. As she pulled it out, she lost her grip for a moment. A heavy object tucked inside flew out and hit the floor with a loud thud. The sound made Nora's heart leap. Did I break the gift? She scrambled down from the stool and found the object on the floor. Her frantic heart stopped for a second, then began to beat even faster. It was a black notebook. She picked it up and wiped the dust from the cover. On the flyleaf, a single name was written over and over. Chapter 29, this notebook, filled with the secrets of her youth, was supposed to have been burned. It had suddenly vanished without a trace. So the diary had been hidden here all along. No wonder she had turned her old room upside down and couldn't find it. Seeing the familiar handwriting again, she couldn't help but feel a stir of emotion. She sat in the chair and began to read from the first page. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice the partially open door being pushed open. Julian stood at the entrance, looking at the figure sitting at the desk, a mix of nostalgia and sorrow on his face. He couldn't remember the last time he had sat here with Nora, teaching her to read and write. The past that has been lost, it will come back, won't it? Julian wasn't sure, but he hoped so. By the time Julian reached Nora's side, she had just finished the last page. Although she already knew he had read the entire thing, seeing the diary in front of him still made her feel the nervous guilt of a thief caught in the act. She desperately tried to hide it behind her back. "Why don't you knock before you come in?" Julian heard the tension in her voice and softened his own as much as possible. "But this is my room, Nora." Nora tried to act as if nothing had happened, making up an excuse to leave. "Since it's your room, I'll be going. Goodbye." Julian didn't stop her. He simply took the diary from her, easily keeping her there. With the evidence gone from her hands, Nora's heart was in her throat. "That's mine, give it back." "How can you prove it's yours? It's filled with my name. Clearly, it's mine." Nora looked at this smooth-talking liar and wanted nothing more than to snatch it back. But she knew she was no match for him physically and could only argue her case. "I wrote all of it. Give it back. I can just get something from my room to compare the handwriting." Julian feigned surprise. "Handwriting can be forged. That's not reliable proof. Why don't you tell me what's written inside? I'll see if the content matches." The thought of reading those things aloud made Nora wish she could just spontaneously combust on the spot with him. When pleading didn't work, she resorted to force, trying to grab it. but Julian was half a head taller than her. She could jump 3 feet in the air and still not reach it. Julian could even leisurely hold the diary up and read from it. Chapter 30, June 18th. I found 3 love letters in Julian's school bag. I took them all to the kitchen and burned them. After reading, Julian put on a chiding expression and tutted. Nora, why did you secretly take my things? Isn't that a little rude? Nora wished the ground would swallow her whole. Julian was about to read more. Neither pleading nor force had worked. Though Nora had a thick skin, she now considered her relationship with Julian to be clearly defined. Being forced to listen to her diary being read aloud was still deeply embarrassing. In her distress, tears began to stream down her face. Julian hadn't expected her to cry. He quickly thrust the diary into her arms and began to comfort her. I'm sorry, Nora. I was just trying to give the diary back to you. Now that she had it back, Nora was ready to flee. But before she could even take a step, she found herself cornered behind the door. She looked pitiful with her teary eyes, but her voice was still feisty. You said you were giving it back to me. Are you going back on your word? Julian looked at the small, huddled figure in the corner, and his heart softened. Forget the diary. I'll give you anything you want. Nora, do you want me? Nora's heart skipped a beat. She looked up and met his gaze. His eyes were filled with a gentle, lingering tenderness, not a trace of jest. I don't. Her voice was a whisper, but Julian heard it clearly. He reached out and took the hand that was clutching the diary. You're lying, Nora. That's not what the last page of your diary says. The warmth from his hand sent a strange heat through Nora's body. Her voice was almost inaudible. Julian had to lean in to hear. That doesn't count anymore. I don't want you now. A tremor went through Julian's heart. Then I'll wait. I'll wait until you want me again, and then I'll come back to you, okay? His words, whispered so close to her ear, made her face flush red. But her mouth still wouldn't say anything nice. I'm not interested now, move. I'm hungry and I want to go downstairs to eat. It was just an excuse she had come up with in her panic, but Julian actually took half a step back, clearing a path. Nora watched him for a moment, and seeing that he was genuinely letting her pass, she tensed up and shuffled toward the door. Once she was free, she felt something was off. She poked her head back in to investigate. The next second, she was pulled back into the room by a strong force, falling into an embrace. A light kiss landed on her forehead. I knew you'd come back, Nora. The end.